My son stood in my living room and announced, "Mom, you're too senile to handle money anymore. We're taking control of your accounts." His wife nodded smugly. I smiled softly and said, "Of course, dear." The next day, my lawyer called them in. When they saw the documents on the table, their faces went white because I'd been managing their money all along. And now they were about to find out what happens when you betray the wrong woman. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. They stood in my living room as if they were inspectors, and I was the problem to be solved. Marcus held his body too straight, his shoulders rigid under his tailored jacket. Chloe hovered just behind him, one hand resting on his arm, her smile a thin, practiced line of concern. The afternoon light through the bay window was harsh, bleaching the color from my Persian rug. "Mom, we need to talk about some important things," Marcus began. His voice had that tone he used in business calls, a false warmth over steel. I did not rise from my armchair. I placed my teacup on the saucer with a soft click. The scent of Earl Grey hung between us. "I am listening." He exchanged a glance with Chloe. She gave a slight, encouraging nod. "It's about your well-being," he said, taking a step forward. "Chloe and we've been worried. We've noticed some lapses." "Lapses," I repeated, my voice neutral. "Yes." Chloe's voice was smoother, syrupy with pretend care. "Just last week you forgot about our dinner, Nora, and the month before you misplaced your bank card. Remember? We had to help you cancel it." I remembered. I had chosen not to attend their dinner, a fact I communicated via text which they claimed never to have received. The bank card had been in my other wallet. I said nothing. Marcus took another breath. "It's more than that. We've looked at your recent spending. It's erratic. There are donations to charities we've never heard of, odd online purchases. It's not like you." This was the rehearsed part. I could see it in the way his eyes shifted to a point on the wall behind me, reciting lines. I had spent 40 years as a financial analyst. I could spot a fabricated narrative in a ledger from a mile away. This was a poor performance. "I see," I said softly. "And what do you propose?" He seemed emboldened by my calm. "We think it's time for a change, for your own protection. The stress of managing everything alone after Dad died, it's too much. We want to help you." "Help me how?" Another glance at Chloe. She stepped forward now, her smile widening into something pitying. "We've spoken to a doctor, Nora, a geriatric specialist. He agrees that what you're showing could be early signs of cognitive decline. It's very common. There's no shame in it." The air in the room grew still. I felt the weight of the words, not as an insult, but as a tactical move. They had consulted a doctor. They had built a case. "So," I said, keeping my hands folded in my lap, "you have a diagnosis." "Not a formal one. Not yet," Marcus said quickly. "But the doctor said the best course is to reduce stressors, immediately. That means not having to worry about bills, investments, taxes. We can handle all of that for you. You want control of my finances." He flinched at the bluntness. "We want to manage them. As a family. We'll set up a joint account. Power of attorney. Just temporary until we get a clearer picture of your health." I let the silence stretch. I watched my son's face, the man I had raised, who I had taught to tie his shoes and balance a checkbook. I searched for the boy in him and saw only the impatient man, already mentally spending the money he had not yet secured. I saw Chloe's eyes bright and greedy, already decorating a new sunroom. The humiliation was a cold, solid thing in my chest, but beneath it, something older and sharper stirred. It was not surprise, it was recognition. I looked down at my teacup. A tiny tremor made the liquid shiver. I let them see it. "It has been more difficult lately," I murmured, making my voice just a degree softer, more uncertain. I saw the victory flash in Chloe's eyes. She masked it with a sympathetic tilt of her head. Marcus leaned in, his posture relaxing. They mistook my calculation for confusion. "We know, Mom," he said, his voice dripping with a son's condescension. "That's why we're here. We're your family. We just want what's best for you." I raised my eyes to his. I allowed a faint, watery smile to touch my lips. "Of course, dear." He blinked. "So, you agree?" "You are my son," I said, the words simple and heavy. "If you and Chloe believe this is necessary, then I trust your judgment." The relief on his face was palpable. He had expected an argument, tears, resistance. He had braced for a fight. My compliance disarmed him completely. "Oh, Mom, that's so sensible. Thank you for being reasonable." Chloe moved to perch on the arm of my chair, a gesture that felt invasive. She placed a hand over mine. Her skin was cool. "We'll take care of everything. You won't have to worry about a thing. We can even start packing some things if you like. Maybe look at some wonderful assisted living communities. They have so many activities." I did not pull my hand away. "There is no rush," I said. "Let us do this properly, through the lawyers, to keep everything correct." "Absolutely," Marcus said, nodding vigorously. "We'll call Arthur Jenkins first thing Monday. He's handled the family's affairs for years. He'll know how to structure it all." A perfect suggestion. "Yes," I agreed. "Arthur will know what to do." They stayed for another half hour, talking brightly of their plans for my house, for my money, for my life. They used words like comfort and safety and rest. I nodded at the appropriate times. I poured them more tea from the pot, my hands steady now. When they finally left, full of plans and self-congratulation, the silence they left behind was different. It was no longer peaceful. It was charged. I remained in my chair as the sun moved across the floor. The bright square of light climbed the opposite wall and faded into dusk. I did not turn on a lamp. I sat in the growing dark and replayed every word, every glance, every rehearsed gesture of concern. The cold feeling in my chest hardened into a plan. It was not a plan of emotion, of hot anger. It was a plan of logistics, of ledgers and clauses and timelines. They had declared me senile. They had mistaken my stillness for weakness, my silence for vacancy. They had just made the first and last mistake of their campaign. They had shown me their battlefield, and they had forgotten that I built the ground it stands on. I rose from the chair. My body did not ache. My mind was clear, sharper than it had been in months. The performance was over. The work was about to begin. I walked to my study, the heels of my shoes making firm, deliberate sounds on the hardwood floor. I had a call to make, but not until Monday. Let them sit with their victory for a weekend. Let them believe they had won. First, I had files to review. The study door closed behind me with a solid, quiet click. The room was exactly as I had left it that morning. The antique cherrywood desk orderly, the leather chair pushed in, the computer monitor dark. The only light came from the brass floor lamp in the corner, casting a warm pool over the desk's surface. I did not sit down immediately. I stood in the center of the room and breathed in the scent of old paper, lemon polish, and stability. First, I went to the small kitchenette off the study and prepared a fresh pot of tea. The routine was mechanical, calming. Boil the water. Warm the pot. Measure the leaves. As it steeped, I stood at the counter and watched the second hand sweep around the clock on the wall. The house was silent, a hollowed-out silence after their departure. I let it settle around me. I was not a woman weeping in an empty house. I was a general reviewing her maps after the enemy had revealed its position. I carried the tray to my desk. I sat down, the familiar creak of the leather a comfort. I took a sip of the tea, the heat and bitterness sharpening my focus. Then I woke the computer. The screen glowed to life, asking for a password. I typed it in, a long string of numbers and letters that was the date of my wedding and the date of Robert's death, combined. The desktop appeared neat and sparse. There were only a few folders. One was labeled Household, another Taxes, a third simply M. I opened the M folder. Inside were more folders, each with a year. I clicked on the current year, then the one before, then the one before that. Spreadsheets opened, rows and columns of numbers in a clean, legible font. These were not my personal accounts. These were the accounts of Vance Dynamic Solutions, my son's business. Marcus believed I took a polite, distant interest in his work. He would give me glossy brochures and talk about big deals. I would smile and nod. He never knew that for the past 8 years, since the business's inception, I had received and reviewed every quarterly financial statement. It was a condition of my initial investment, structured not as a gift, but as a silent loan through a trust. Arthur Jenkins handled the mechanics. The reports came to him, and he forwarded them to me. Marcus signed the agreements without reading the fine print, so eager for the capital he assumed was a gift from a proud mother. I scanned the most recent spreadsheet. The numbers told a clear, bleak story. Revenue was down 30% from 2 years ago. Operating costs were inflated. There were several large recurring withdrawals labeled owner's compensation and business development. I cross-referenced these with another document, a list of Marcus and Chloe's personal expenditures I had compiled from bank and credit card statements they had, ironically, asked me to help them understand a year ago when they were budgeting. The business development charges coincided with luxury resort stays. The owner's compensation spikes aligned with payments to a high-end interior designer and the lease on Chloe's new car. The business was not failing because of market forces. It was being bled dry by personal greed. I opened another file. This one contained records from the Greenbrier Family Trust. This was the vehicle I had used to provide the down payment for their house. The trust held the second mortgage. Their monthly payments were zidong chuanzhong, but I had deferred them for the first 2 years as a gift. That grace period had ended 6 months ago. The statement showed only 2 partial payments had been made since. They were already in arrears. I printed key pages. The printer hummed quietly, spitting out sheets of evidence in black and white. I did not feel triumph. I felt a profound, weary disappointment. The numbers were a language I understood perfectly. They spoke of entitlement, not struggle, of presumption, not poor luck. I stacked the pages neatly. I then picked up the phone on my desk, a landline with a coiled cord. It was Friday evening. I knew Arthur Jenkins would be at his home office. He was a man of habit, like me. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Jenkins. Arthur. It's Nora Vance." His voice warmed immediately. "Nora, a pleasure. I was just thinking I should call you next week to schedule our quarterly review." "Our review has become urgent," I said, my voice even. "I require a meeting on Monday morning, 9 o'clock. A pause on the line. I could hear the shift in his posture, the click of a pen. "Urgent. Is everything all right?" "No, Arthur, it is not. My son and his wife visited me this afternoon. They have declared me mentally incompetent. They intend to petition for power of attorney and control over all my assets." The silence that followed was thick with shock, then a gathering coldness I knew well. Arthur had been my and Robert's lawyer for 30 years. He had helped me structure my estate after Robert's death. He understood the value I placed on autonomy. "I see," he said finally, his tone now all professional crispness. "And how did you respond?" "I agreed." Another pause. "You agreed." "I agreed that we should proceed through proper legal channels. I suggested they contact you on Monday to begin the process. I believe they will." He let out a short, understanding breath. "Ah, so they will walk into the office expecting to start one process. And they will find themselves in the middle of another," I finished. "I have the documentation here, Arthur. The business statements, the trust arrears, the personal expenditure reports. I want to review it all with you first thing Monday. Then when they call, you will invite them in for a meeting later in the week, a meeting to discuss the transition." "I understand completely," he said. I could hear the faint sound of papers shuffling. "The full audit. The calling of notes, the dissolution of the supportive trusts based on breach of fiduciary duty and misuse of funds." "Precisely." "Nora," he said, his voice lowering slightly, "this will be consequential for them, for your relationship with Marcus." I looked at the column of numbers on the screen, the proof of their betrayal not of me but of the responsibility I had tried to give them. "The relationship is already changed, Arthur. They changed it. Now we must establish the new terms. I will not be a prisoner in my own life, declared senile by my own children, so they can spend my husband's legacy on resort vacations." "No," he agreed, his voice firm. "You will not. I'll have everything prepared. 9 o'clock Monday, and Nora?" "Yes? It is a good thing you never were sentimental about keeping records." A faint cold smile touched my lips. "Sentiment is a luxury for secure people, Arthur. I have always preferred preparedness." I hung up the phone. The plan was now in motion, a clockwork mechanism engaged. I shut down the computer. I finished my tea, now gone cold. I filed the printed pages in a fresh folder, which I placed in my desk drawer and locked. I left the study and walked through my dark, quiet house. I checked the locks on the doors. I adjusted the thermostat. I performed the small, ordinary rituals of ownership. This was my sanctuary. This was my throne room. They had mistaken it for a storage unit waiting to be emptied. They would learn the cost of that error. I went to bed, but I did not sleep for a long time. I lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the house, to the distant whisper of the furnace, to the settling of beams that had sheltered my family for decades. I thought of Robert, of the life we built with careful hands. I felt his absence beside me, a familiar ache. But I also felt a resolve, as solid as the foundations beneath me. This was not just about money. It was about respect. It was about the narrative of my own mind. And on Monday, I would begin the process of reclaiming it, line by line, number by number. The calm was over. The strategy had begun. The weekend passed in a state of suspended quiet. I performed my usual routines: grocery shopping, tending to the potted herbs on the kitchen windowsill, a long phone call with an old friend where I spoke of the weather and her grandchildren. I did not mention my son. The normality was a deliberate practice, a maintenance of calm. Inside, my mind was a silent conference room, running through scenarios, anticipating arguments, reviewing the numbers I had already committed to memory. Monday morning arrived with a clear, sharp sky. I dressed with particular care: a navy wool dress, a single strand of pearls, low-heeled pumps. I applied a subtle lipstick. I examined myself in the hall mirror. I looked composed, authoritative, unassailable. I did not look like a woman anyone could reasonably declare incapable. Arthur's office was in a downtown building of steel and glass. I had been there many times, but never for a meeting like this. His assistant, a young man with a serious demeanor, showed me directly into the conference room adjacent to Arthur's private office. Arthur was already there, standing at the head of a long mahogany table. Several thick folders and a tablet computer were arranged before him. "Nora," he said, coming around the table to pull out a chair for me. "You look well." "I am prepared," I replied, taking the seat. He returned to his position. The room was quiet, insulated from the city sounds below. "I've pulled everything," he began, without preamble. "The full picture is comprehensive, more so than even I had fully appreciated until this weekend." He opened the first folder. "Let's start with Vance Dynamics Solutions." He slid a summary sheet across the table to me. I glanced at it, confirming what I already knew. The initial seed capital of $250,000 came from the Vance Growth Trust, which you established in 2015. Arthur said. The terms were clear: a low-interest loan, repayments to begin after 3 years, with full financial disclosure required quarterly. Marcus signed. He has missed the last 6 consecutive quarterly payments. The business's operating account currently holds approximately $18,000. Its liabilities, including back taxes and the outstanding loan principal, exceed $400,000. I nodded. And the personal spending? Arthur opened a second folder. This one contained bank and credit card statements, not just the ones I had seen, but others. This is where it becomes more acute, he said, his voice neutral. Marcus's personal accounts are overdrawn. They have been using a high-interest line of credit to cover basic expenses for the last 4 months. However, that is not the primary issue. He tapped a statement from a different bank. Chloe opened a separate credit card account 2 years ago. You are not listed on it. She used your home address for the statements, but a different P.O. box for correspondence. The credit limit was $50,000. It is maxed out. He let that fact sit in the air. The irresponsibility was one thing. The secrecy was another. The charges? I asked. Luxury goods, clothing, jewelry, spa packages, several large payments to the interior design firm that did their home. There is also a pattern of cash advances. He turned a page. More critically, there is the Greenbrier Trust, the second mortgage on their home. They are 90 days in arrears. The terms state that after 90 days, the full principal can be called due. I leaned back in my chair. The numbers were worse than I had calculated from my own records. The facade of their life was thinner, more desperate. They have been using my potential decline as their financial plan, I stated. It appears so, Arthur agreed. Their liquidity is non-existent. The business is insolvent. Their personal debt is substantial and growing. Their only asset of significant value is their home equity, which is partly secured by your trust. They likely see gaining control of your assets as the only way to avoid immediate foreclosure and bankruptcy. And they believed it would be easy, I said, because I am a kind mother, because I am a widow, because I am, in their new narrative, old and confused. Arthur did not contradict me. He opened a third folder. These are the documents we have prepared. First, a formal demand for payment in full from the Vance Growth Trust, citing breach of contract. Second, a foreclosure notice for the Greenbrier Trust mortgage, following the terms of the agreement. Third, a cease and desist letter regarding any further attempts to pursue guardianship or power of attorney, along with a draft of a counter-petition we would file alleging financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, them exploiting you. We have the medical evaluation you commissioned last year, which clearly states you are of sound mind. We also have the paper trail of their financial maneuvers. He handed me the draft of the cease and desist letter. The language was cold, legal, final. It referred to their bad faith actions and predatory intent. When do we proceed? I asked. As we discussed, Arthur said. I expect their call this morning. When they contact me to begin the process, I will express my concern about conflicts of interest, given my long-standing representation of you. I will suggest a meeting later in the week to discuss the situation holistically. I will not specify whose situation. They will assume it is about declaring you incompetent. They will come, and we will be ready. We will. Arthur closed the folders, stacking them into a neat pile. Nora, I have to ask, this is the nuclear option. It will likely result in the loss of their home, the collapse of his business, and significant personal bankruptcy for them. There is no coming back from this, relationally. I looked at the stack of folders, the physical weight of their folly and my vigilance. I thought of the living room ultimatum, of Chloe's pitying smile, of Marcus's rehearsed lines about my senility. They had not come to me for help. They had come to dismantle me. They made a declaration, Arthur, I said, my voice steady. They declared me unfit, a burden, a problem to be managed. They did not see a person. They saw an asset to be seized. I am merely accepting their declaration and presenting its logical consequences. If I am too senile to handle my money, then I am certainly too senile to continue subsidizing their failure. The support ends. The loans are called. Let them handle their own money. We will see how capable they are. Arthur gave a single, slow nod. He understood. This was not mere revenge. It was a brutal, precise alignment of reality with their own claims. If I was incompetent, then all my past financial actions, including the supports I provided, must be reevaluated and unwound. It was flawless logic. "The meeting is set for Thursday at 10 a.m., he said. "I will have 2 associates present as witnesses. I will record the session with your permission." "Granted." I stood up. The meeting was over. The strategy was set. The web they thought they were spinning for me was, in fact, the one they had been living in for years, woven from my silent support. Now I held the shears. "Thank you, Arthur." Always, Nora. I left the office building and stepped into the mid-morning sun. The city moved around me, people engaged in their own dramas and calculations. I felt no excitement, no grim pleasure, only a clear, cold certainty. The pieces were on the board. On Thursday, we would begin the final accounting. The 2 days between my meeting with Arthur and Thursday morning were a study in stillness. I occupied my time with methodical tasks. I organized my filing cabinets. I balanced my personal checkbook to the penny. I deadheaded the roses in the garden. Each action was a reaffirmation of control, of a mind functioning with precision. The house phone rang once. It was Marcus, his voice buoyant with false concern. "Just checking in, Mom. How are you holding up?" "I'm perfectly well, Marcus," I said, my tone pleasant and vague. "How are you?" Busy, but we're taking care of things. We spoke to Arthur Jenkins' office. We have a meeting set up for Thursday to get the ball rolling. He said he wanted to discuss everything in person. Very thorough." I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. He believed Arthur's thoroughness was in service to their goal. "That sounds very responsible," I said. "Don't you worry about a thing. We'll handle it. You just relax." The condescension was so thick it was almost tangible. I thanked him and ended the call. Arthur confirmed the conversation later that evening. "He called personally," Arthur said. "He was quite eager. He said, and I quote, 'We need to move quickly for my mother's own good.'" He accepted the meeting for 10 a.m. without hesitation. "And Chloe?" I asked. "She was on the extension. She asked if they needed to bring any specific documents, like your bank statements or medical records. I told them just to bring themselves and any paperwork they felt was relevant." I knew what that meant. They would arrive with a file folder of their own, containing printouts of my erratic donations and perhaps a note from the doctor they had consulted. They would be prepared for a negotiation about my decline. They would be utterly unprepared for the actual topic. On Thursday morning, I dressed not for a defense, but for a pronouncement. I chose a charcoal gray suit, a cream silk blouse, my hair swept back. My reflection was that of a bored chairwoman, not a vulnerable matriarch. I drove myself downtown, my hands steady on the wheel. I arrived at Arthur's office at 9:15. His assistant showed me not into the conference room, but into Arthur's private office first. The 3 folders from Monday were there, plus a few more. A small recording device sat beside them. "They are due in 45 minutes, Arthur said. "My associates, Ms. Chen and Mr. Rossi, will be present as witnesses. They are already briefed. I suggest you wait here until 5 minutes before 10. Then I will escort you to the conference room. You will already be seated when they are shown in." I agreed. It was a small tactical advantage, controlling the space. I sat in a comfortable chair by the window, looking out at the city. I did not review the documents. I knew what they contained. I focused on maintaining a state of calm detachment. This was not a family meeting. This was a fiduciary review. I needed to treat it as such. At 5 minutes to 10, Arthur opened his office door. "It's time." I stood and followed him down a short, carpeted hallway to a door marked Conference Room B. He opened it for me. The room was as I remembered: the long mahogany table, the high-backed leather chairs, the muted landscape prints on the walls. The folders were arranged at one end of the table. Two serious-looking professionals, a man and a woman, sat to the side with notepads. I took the seat at the head of the table, my back to the window. Arthur took the seat to my immediate right. We sat in silence for a few moments. Then, through the door, I heard the chime of the elevator in the reception area. I heard the muffled sound of voices. One was the assistant's low tone. The other was Marcus's, louder, infused with a confident heartiness. "Yes, we have a 10 o'clock with Arthur Jenkins, Vance, Marcus, and Chloe Vance." The door to the conference room was thick, but not so thick that I couldn't hear the tone. It was the tone of a man arriving to close a deal. I imagined them in the reception area, Chloe straightening Marcus's tie, both of them wearing expressions of solemn responsibility. Arthur's assistant opened the door. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance, you can come in now." Marcus entered first, a professional smile on his face. He was carrying a slim leather folio. Chloe followed, her steps measured, her eyes already scanning the room, assessing. They took 2 steps in before they stopped. The professional smiles froze, then dissolved into confusion. They saw Arthur. They saw the 2 associates, and then their eyes landed on me, seated at the head of the table, my posture erect, my hands folded on the table before me. I met my son's gaze directly. I saw the rapid calculations flash behind his eyes. Why is she here? She shouldn't be here. This is a legal meeting. Did Arthur bring her to convince her? "Mom," Marcus said, the words slipping out, tinged with surprise and a hint of annoyance. "What are you doing here?" Chloe recovered more quickly, her social instincts taking over. She placed a restraining hand on Marcus's arm and offered a tight smile. "Nora, we didn't expect to see you. We thought this was just a meeting with Arthur to discuss the procedures." Arthur stood. "Please, come in and sit down." He gestured to the chairs on the opposite side of the table, directly facing me. They moved slowly, like people walking into an unexpected room. Marcus pulled out a chair for Chloe, then sat beside her, placing his folio on the table. He looked from me to Arthur. "I'm confused, Arthur. We're here to discuss the power of attorney and the conservatorship for my mother. Her presence might not be advisable, given the circumstances." Arthur steepled his fingers. "There seems to be a misunderstanding, Marcus. This meeting is not to discuss a conservatorship for Eleanor Vance." A beat of silence. Marcus's brow furrowed. "Then what is it about?" Arthur opened the top folder. "This meeting is to discuss the imminent foreclosure of your home, the default of your business loan, and the legal consequences of your attempt to financially exploit your mother." The color drained from Marcus's face so completely it was as if someone had pulled a plug. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Chloe's hand flew to her throat. The confident veneer they had walked in with shattered, leaving behind raw, uncomprehending shock. They were not in the room they had prepared for. They were in mine, and the proceedings were about to begin. The silence that followed Arthur's statement was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Marcus stared, his face a blank mask of incomprehension. Chloe's hand remained at her throat, her knuckles white. The leather folio Marcus had brought looked suddenly foolish, a prop for a play that had been canceled. "What?" The word was a dry croak from Marcus's throat. He shook his head as if to clear water from his ears. "Arthur, that's insane. There's some mistake. We're here to protect my mother." "The only person requiring protection from you at this moment is your mother," Arthur replied, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. It was the voice of a lawyer reading a verdict. "But let's clarify. You are here today because you initiated proceedings to have your mother, Eleanor Vance, declared mentally incompetent, primarily to gain control of her assets. Is that correct?" Marcus's eyes darted to me, pleading, confused. "Mom, what is this? What's going on?" I said nothing. I kept my gaze level, letting Arthur conduct the proceedings. "Please answer the question, Marcus," Arthur said. "It's not like that," Chloe burst out, her composure cracking. "We are concerned for her well-being. She's showing signs of decline. We have a doctor's opinion. This is about her safety." She reached into her bag and pulled out a sheet of paper, thrusting it toward Arthur. "See? A note from Dr. Evans." Arthur did not take the paper. He glanced at it, then back at her. "Dr. Evans, the geriatric specialist you consulted for a single hour-long appointment, to which you did not bring your mother? That note is not a diagnosis. It is a list of general symptoms you described to him. It is worthless. In contrast, I have here a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation conducted on Mrs. Vance 8 months ago at my suggestion, following the passing of a close friend. It was a baseline assessment. The conclusion from a board-certified neurologist is that she exhibits no cognitive impairment whatsoever. Her financial decision-making capacity is rated as superior. He slid a copy of the report's summary page across the table. It landed in front of Marcus with a soft slap. Marcus did not pick it up. He stared at it. "So," Arthur continued, "the premise of your action is false. Therefore, we must examine the motivation behind it. And the motivation appears to be rooted in your own acute financial distress." "That is a disgusting accusation," Marcus said, finding his voice, though it was shaky with indignation. "It is a documented fact," Arthur corrected. He opened the first of the thick folders. "Let's begin with Vance Dynamic Solutions. The business is functionally insolvent. It has missed 6 consecutive quarterly loan repayments on the $250,000 seed capital provided by the Vance Growth Trust. The trust, which your mother established. You have breached the contract." Marcus's mouth worked. That was a gift. Mom's investment in my dream. "It was a loan," I spoke for the first time. My voice was calm, clear, and it seemed to startle them more than Arthur's legalese. They both flinched, turning to me as if I were a statue that had spoken. "A loan with terms. You signed the documents. I have the copies. You have not honored them." "You never said anything," Marcus protested, a child's whine entering his tone. "I was giving you time to correct the course yourself," I said. "I was waiting for you to come to me to discuss the struggles honestly. You never did. You instead decided the solution was to remove me from the equation." Chloe found her strategic footing. "Nora, please, if you've been monitoring things, you can see we're under pressure. The market is terrible. This is exactly why you shouldn't be burdened with this stress. Let us handle it. We can fix this together, as a family." "You are not offering to handle it together," I said. "You declared me incapable and announced you were taking control. That is not collaboration. That is a coup." Arthur tapped the table, redirecting the focus. "The business is one issue. The more pressing issue is the Greenbrier Family Trust. This trust holds the second mortgage on your home. You are 93 days in arrears on payments. The terms are clear. The full principal balance can now be called due immediately." The blood finally left Chloe's face entirely. "You can't do that," she whispered. "The trust can, and it will," Arthur said. He opened another folder. "Today you will be served with formal notice of foreclosure proceedings. You have 30 days to vacate the property or to pay the outstanding balance in full, which is," he consulted a sheet, $187,000. Marcus slumped back in his chair as if struck. "The house?" "Furthermore," Arthur pressed on, his tone relentless, "we've reviewed your personal finances, the secret credit lines, the cash advances, the misuse of business funds for personal luxury." He looked directly at Chloe. "The separate account in your name alone, Mrs. Vance, with a $50,000 balance carried at a 29% interest rate. The statements were sent to your mother's address. That is mail fraud, in addition to being a profound breach of trust." Chloe's hand fell from her throat to clutch the edge of the table. Her manicured nails dug into the polished wood. This this is an ambush," Marcus stammered, his eyes wide with dawning horror. He looked at me, genuine confusion mixing with the fear. "Mom, why? Why would you do this to us? We're your family." I felt the weight of the question, the anchor of a lifetime of love and expectation. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and saw the little boy who had skinned his knee and run to me, the young man I had taught to drive, the man I had tried to set up for success. The disappointment was a cold, heavy stone in my stomach, but it did not alter my course. "You asked me that question in my living room, Marcus," I said, my voice still quiet but filling the silent room. "You asked why I would make odd donations, why I would seem confused. You had your answer ready, senility. Now you ask why I would do this. You will have your answer for that, too. But first, you will listen to the full accounting of what you have done and what you have failed to do. Then I will tell you my terms." I gave a slight nod to Arthur. He opened the next folder, preparing to lay out the evidence line by line. The room was no longer a conference room. It was a courtroom, and I was both the wronged party and the judge. Arthur opened the folder with a crisp sound. He removed a stack of documents, each clipped together with a colored tab. He placed the first set in front of Marcus and Chloe. It was a copy of the Vance Growth Trust Agreement. "Let us begin with the foundation," Arthur said, his finger pointing to a specific clause. "Section 4.2, Quarterly Financial Disclosure. You are required to submit profit and loss statements, balance sheets, and cash flow analyses. You submitted them for the first 2 years. Then the submissions became sporadic, then non-existent." He placed a log sheet next to it showing dates of receipt. The last entry was over 18 months old. Marcus stared at the page. "The accountant was supposed to handle that. I told him to." "You are the signatory. The responsibility was yours," Arthur stated, unmoved. He moved to the next set of papers. "Now, the disbursements from the business account." He laid out bank statements with certain lines highlighted in yellow. "Here, a transfer of $15,000 to Azure Sun Interiors on March 15th, classified as office refurbishment." He then placed a corresponding invoice from Azure Sun Interiors. The description read, "Custom sectional sofa, living room. Drapery fabrication and installation, design consultation fee." "That's for the client lounge," Marcus said weakly, but the protest died in his throat. "The address on the invoice is your home address," Arthur said. He laid another highlighted statement. "A payment to Pinnacle Auto Leasing, classified as corporate vehicle. The VIN number matches the BMW X5 registered in your wife's name." Chloe looked down at her hands, her face ashen. Arthur continued, methodical and relentless. For 20 minutes he matched their personal luxuries to business account withdrawals, the luxury resort charges, the designer clothing purchases from boutiques coded as client gifts, the lavish restaurant meals labeled business development. The evidence was mundane and damning. It was not the crime of a mastermind, but the sloppy greed of people who believed no one was watching. Then he opened the second, slimmer folder, the Greenbrier Family Trust. He slid the original mortgage agreement across. "Your primary mortgage is with First Federal. This is the second for 20% of the purchase price, provided interest-free for the first 5 years as an equity builder." He pointed to the signature lines. "A gift of opportunity, not a grant of entitlement." He then presented the payment history. The Zidong Zhuangzhang had been set up. For the first 2 years, as per the terms, the payments showed as deferred gift period. Then the payments were to begin. The log showed a few small, irregular transfers, then nothing for the last 93 days. A bright red stamp on the final notice read, "In default." "You have made no meaningful effort to pay this obligation," Arthur said. "You instead redirected those funds." He attached a statement showing a transfer of a similar amount to a luxury cruise line the same month the mortgage payment was missed. Marcus had stopped speaking. He simply watched the papers appear before him as if witnessing an autopsy on his own life. Then Arthur opened the third folder. This one contained credit card statements. He did not hand these across. He held them up one by one. "This is the separate account, Chloe. Opened in your name only. The mailing address is your mother-in-law's home. The P.O. box for correspondence is one you rented." He read a few charges aloud. His voice was flat, dispassionate. $1,200, La Perla. $2,500, Cartier Repair. $4,000, the Wellness Sanctuary. $5,000 cash advance. He looked at her. "You have made minimum payments only, accruing massive interest. This debt is yours alone. It is not community property as it was concealed. In a bankruptcy proceeding, it will remain solely yours." Chloe made a small, choked sound. Her carefully constructed facade of the concerned daughter-in-law was gone, replaced by the raw panic of a cornered animal. She said we should enjoy our lives. She never said there were strings." I finally moved. I leaned forward slightly. "I said you should build a life, not that you should burn the foundation for kindling." Arthur placed the final document on the table. It was a single-page summary prepared by his firm. It listed total liabilities: the defaulted business loan, the mortgage in foreclosure, the personal credit card debt, the back taxes. It contrasted it with their assets: the house equity, partly secured by my trust, the depreciating business assets, 2 leased cars. The bottom line was a large negative number in bold font. "This is your financial reality," Arthur said, tapping the summary. "You are not victims of a bad economy. You are victims of your own choices. And your chosen solution was not to adjust your spending or to come clean and ask for help. Your solution was to declare the person who provided your foundation to be mentally defective, so you could seize the remainder of her resources to maintain your lifestyle." Marcus found his voice, but it was shattered, a broken thing. "You knew? All this time you knew we were struggling and you just watched? You let us fail?" "I provided the capital," I said, my voice cutting through his self-pity. "I provided the house assistance. I provided time. I did not provide a lifetime subsidy for dishonesty. I was waiting for you to speak to me as an adult, to a partner. You spoke to me as a mark." The room was silent again, but now the silence was different. It was filled with the rubble of their narrative, the story they had told themselves of a declining mother, of their own noble burden, of a rightful inheritance, lay in pieces on the mahogany table, surrounded by the paper proofs of their carelessness. Arthur closed all the folders. He stacked them neatly. "The documents you have seen today are copies. Formal notices of foreclosure and demand for loan repayment will be delivered to your home by a process server tomorrow. You have 30 days to vacate the property. You have 45 days to settle the business loan in full, or we will proceed with asset seizure." He paused, letting the deadlines hang in the chilled air. "Furthermore, due to your demonstrated attempt to exploit Eleanor Vance, any future communication regarding her person or her assets must go through this office. Any further direct contact attempting to pressure her or influence her decisions will be met with a restraining order and a filing of elder exploitation charges with the district attorney's office. Do you understand?" Marcus did not nod. He was staring at the summary sheet, at the bold negative number as if it were a verdict. Chloe was crying now, silent tears streaking her makeup, not from remorse, I thought, but from the sheer terror of the consequences. The accounting was complete. The ledger was balanced. They had come to declare me senile. They were leaving exposed as fools. The evidence was not dramatic. It was columns of numbers, lines of text, signatures on dotted lines. It was the unassailable truth of the life they had built on the quiet, patient capital I had provided. And now, that capital was being called home. The finality of Arthur's last sentence seemed to suck all the air from the room. The numbers and accusations hung in the space between us, a ledger of failure. Marcus was pale, shrunken into his chair. Chloe's tears had stopped, leaving tracks through her foundation, her eyes wide and fixed on the table. They were waiting for the next legal blow, but the legal blows were done. Now it was time for the human ones. I looked at Arthur and gave a slight nod. He understood. This was my turn. He and his associates became still, silent witnesses. I straightened my spine, my hands resting flat on the cool table. I looked at my son. "You asked me why, Marcus," I began. My voice was not loud, but it filled the quiet room with a clarity that made him flinch. "You asked why I would do this to my family. That is the wrong question. The right question is why you thought you could do this to me." He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. "I loved your father," I said, the statement simple and solid. "We built a life together from careful decisions. We saved, we invested, we planned. When he died, that planning meant I could continue in dignity. It also meant I could help you." I shifted my gaze to Chloe, then back to Marcus. "I did not help you so you could pretend to be something you are not. I helped you so you could build something real. The business loan was not a gift. It was a test of your character. The mortgage assistance was not an entitlement. It was a foundation for you to grow from." I paused, letting the words settle. "I have watched you for 8 years. I watched you take the capital and use it not to strengthen your business, but to finance a performance. I watched you confuse revenue with success, debt with sophistication. I said nothing because I believed, foolishly, that you would learn, that you would feel the weight of the responsibility and rise to meet it." My voice remained even, but the disappointment in it was a tangible thing. "You never did. Instead, you began to look at what I had left as your solution, my house, my investments, my stability. You did not see a mother. You saw a reservoir to be drained, and when you judged the time was right, you and your wife crafted a story where I was the problem, where my competence was a barrier to your comfort." Chloe found a shred of defiance. "We were worried. You have to see that. The forgetfulness, the strange checks." "The strange checks were to a literacy nonprofit I have supported for a decade," I interrupted, my tone slicing through her protest. "The forgetfulness was my deliberate choice not to engage with your drama. You mistook my silence for vacancy. You mistook my patience for weakness. That was your critical error." I leaned forward just an inch. "You declared me senile. You stood in my home and told me I was incapable. You believed your own story so completely that you walked in here today expecting to be handed the keys to my life." I gestured to the stacked folders. "Now you have been handed the keys to your own, the full, unvarnished truth of what you have built or failed to build. The truth does not require a doctor's note. It is in black and white." Marcus finally spoke, his voice ragged. "So what now? You ruin us. You throw us out on the street. What kind of mother does that?" The question hung there, charged with all his hurt and accusation. I met it head on. "The kind of mother who refuses to be an accomplice in her own child's failure," I said. "The kind of mother who knows that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop preventing the consequences of poor choices. You are a grown man, Marcus, nearly 40 years old. It is past time for you to face the reality of your decisions without me as a buffer." I took a slow breath. "So, here are my terms. They are not negotiable. First, you will vacate the house within 30 days. You will not come to me for money to rent another. You will find a solution within your own means. Second, the business loan is due. You may declare bankruptcy for the business. That is your choice. Third, all personal financial support from me ceases, now and permanently. The trusts are dissolved." Chloe made a small, desperate sound. "Our things." our home. You should have considered your things and your home before you decided to take mine, I said without looking at her. My focus was on my son. Fourth, and most important, you will never again question my mind, my judgment, or my right to control my own life. If you wish to have a relationship with me, it will be on new terms. It will be as adults, with respect. There will be no discussions of money. There will be no pity. There will be no condescension. You will speak to me as Nora Vance, a person, not as a resource or a patient. The silence that followed was deeper than before. Marcus was crying now, silent tears of shame and shock rolling down his face. He was not crying for me, I knew. He was crying for the loss of the world he thought was his. You have a choice, I said, my voice softening only a fraction. You can rail against this as an injustice. You can blame me as you are doing now. That path leads nowhere. Or you can take these consequences as the most expensive lesson of your life. You can start over, build something real this time, with your own hands and your own integrity. That path is hard, but it is the only one that leads to a life you can actually own. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The movement was smooth, definitive. Arthur and his associates stood as well. The legal documents will guide you on the first 3 terms, I said, looking down at them. The 4th term is up to you. I will not contact you. The next move is yours. If you choose to make one, it will not be about money. It will be about an apology, a real one. Until then, you have your own affairs to manage. I suggest you begin. I turned and walked toward the conference room door. Arthur moved ahead to open it for me. I did not look back. I walked out into the hallway, leaving them surrounded by the wreckage of their plot and the crushing weight of their freedom. My speech was done. The gavel had fallen. The sentence was not just financial, it was emotional, relational. I had taken back my narrative, and in doing so, I had handed them back theirs, raw, unfunded, and entirely their own. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing off the conference room. I stood in the hushed hallway for a moment, the thick carpet absorbing all sound. Arthur emerged a few seconds later, closing the door gently. He looked at me, his expression professional, but his eyes holding a question. "They need a moment," he said quietly. "Then I must go back in to conclude the formalities. Are you all right?" I nodded. The adrenaline that had sustained my speech was receding, leaving behind a hollow, clean feeling. "I am. I will wait in your office." I walked down the hall, each step firm. I entered Arthur's office and went to the window. The city continued its indifferent pace below. I did not sit. I watched the traffic, the tiny people, and let the stillness wash over me. I had said what needed to be said. The rest was administration. After about 10 minutes, I heard the conference room door open. I heard the murmur of Arthur's voice, then the sound of footsteps, heavier, slower, moving down the hall toward the reception area. A moment later, Arthur returned to his office. He closed the door. "It's done," he said. He walked to his desk and picked up a remote, pointing it at a small speaker on a shelf. "I should play you the final part. For the record." He pressed a button. The audio was crisp. I heard the rustle of papers, a stifled sob, Chloe's, then Arthur's voice, cool and clear. "To reiterate the actionable items, as of this moment," the recording played. Arthur's voice was methodical. 1. The Greenbrier Family Trust is invoking the default clause. You will receive formal foreclosure notice tomorrow. You have 30 calendar days to vacate the property. The trust will list the property for sale to recover its equity. 2. The Vance Growth Trust demand for full repayment of the $250,000 principal plus accrued interest is hereby served. You have 45 days to remit payment. Failure to do so will result in liens placed on any remaining business assets and a civil judgment for the balance. On the recording, Marcus's voice, thick and blurred, interrupted. "We don't have that." You know we don't. Bankruptcy is an option for the business entity, Arthur's recorded voice replied, without inflection. You should consult your own counsel. 3. All other informal financial supports are terminated. The monthly stipends from your mother's accounts to yours will cease immediately. 4. As per Mrs. Vance's directive, any future communication regarding financial matters or attempts to discuss guardianship must come through this firm. Any direct contact of a pressuring nature will be documented and met with legal action. There was a long pause on the recording. Then Chloe's voice, shaky but sharp with desperation. She can't do this. We're family. There has to be some arrangement, a payment plan, something. The arrangement was the original loan documents and the mortgage agreement, Arthur's voice stated. You did not adhere to those arrangements. Mrs. Vance is under no obligation to create new ones. The terms are as stated. This is because of what we said about her mind, isn't it? Marcus said, his voice rising in something like hope. It's retaliation. That's not legal. Arthur's response was swift. It is not retaliation. It is the logical consequence of your own legal premise. You asserted she lacked capacity. If she lacked capacity, then the ongoing financial management she was providing, the trusts, the supports, must be reviewed and wound up for her protection. We have reviewed them. We have determined the supports were being exploited and are therefore being terminated. We are simply following the course of action your own claim set in motion. It is perfectly legal. In fact, it is our fiduciary duty. The brilliant, cruel logic of it echoed in the quiet office. I had not just defeated their plan. I had used their plan's own premise to dismantle their world. They were trapped in their own argument. The recording continued with a few more questions, logistical ones about where to send keys, how to handle mail. The answers were brief. Then the sound of chairs scraping back, of slow footsteps. The recording ended with the click of the door. Arthur turned off the speaker. They left. The process server will be at their home at 9 a.m. Tomorrow. The bank has been instructed to halt all automated transfers. It is operative immediately. Thank you, Arthur. There is one more thing, he said. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is a draft of a new trust I've drawn up, the Vance Legacy Fund. It would take a portion of the capital being reclaimed and designate it for charitable purposes, a scholarship, perhaps, or grants for women in finance. It would be under your sole control. I thought you might want to consider redirecting the energy. I took the paper. It was a simple framework. It represented a future, a positive outcome from the wreckage. I will consider it. Seriously. He nodded, satisfied. What will you do now? I looked out the window again. The immediate battle was over. The consequences were now in motion, a series of legal and financial dominoes that would fall with impersonal force. My part was largely done. I will go home. I will have a proper cup of tea. I will wait, and I will see what, if anything, grows from the ground I have just cleared. Arthur walked me to the elevator. The reception area was empty. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished metal. I looked tired. I looked older. But my eyes were clear, and my head was held at the same angle it always had been. I had not been broken. I had been forced to bend, and in bending, I had found a steel I did not know I still possessed. The descent was smooth and silent. The consequences were no longer a plan in a folder. They were a reality, set in motion. For Marcus and Chloe, the next 30 days would be a scramble for survival, a brutal education in consequence. For me, it was the beginning of an unfamiliar quiet. I had won. The victory felt less like triumph and more like a difficult, necessary surgery. The tumor of their entitlement had been removed. Now the healing for all of us would have to begin. The elevator descended in a smooth, silent glide. I watched the floor numbers light up in succession, a countdown to the lobby. When the doors opened, the bustle of the building's atrium felt like a different world. People hurried with coffee cups, engaged in phone conversations, laughed with colleagues. The normalcy of it was a stark contrast to the sealed courtroom drama 20 floors above. I walked through the crowd, unseen. I was just another well-dressed woman leaving a meeting. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The city air was cooler, carrying the scent of exhaust and pretzels from a nearby cart. I turned left, heading toward the parking garage where I had left my car. My steps were automatic. Then I stopped. I turned back and looked up at the building, my eyes finding the row of windows near the top that I knew belonged to Arthur's suite. I saw them emerge from the building's rotating doors first. Marcus's posture was slumped, as if the weight of the folders he no longer carried was still crushing his shoulders. Chloe walked beside him, her arms wrapped tightly around herself despite the mild day. They did not touch each other. They did not speak. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, disoriented, like survivors of a small personal earthquake. They looked up and down the street, not as people deciding which way to go, but as people who had forgotten where they were going at all. A taxi honked. They flinched. Marcus finally took Chloe's elbow, a gesture that seemed more functional than comforting, and steered her toward the corner. They disappeared into the stream of pedestrians, two figures swallowed by the city's indifferent rhythm. I stood and watched the space where they had been. The sorrow arrived then, not as a wave, but as a deep, cold seep. It was the sorrow for the son I had raised, for the hope I had nurtured, for the family narrative that was now irreparably broken. It was the sorrow for myself, for the mother who had to become a strategist and an executioner. I let myself feel it there on the busy street. I did not fight the tears that pricked at my eyes. But I did not let them fall. I took a long, slow breath, and the cold air helped solidify the resolve beneath the grief. This was the cost. This was the consequence I had chosen when I chose to fight back. There was no satisfaction in seeing them broken. There was only the grim acknowledgement that it had been necessary. The relief was there, too. A profound, quiet relief that the battle was over, that I had not been defeated, that my mind and my home were still my own. I turned my back on the building and walked to the garage. I retrieved my car and drove home through the midday traffic. The familiar route was a comfort. I parked in my driveway, the crunch of gravel under the tires a sound of return. My house waited, silent and solid. Inside, the stillness was different than it had been after their initial visit. That stillness had been charged with plotting. This stillness was one of aftermath. I removed my suit jacket and hung it in the hall closet. I made tea, not the delicate Earl Grey, but a strong, plain black tea. I took the cup to the living room, to the very armchair I had occupied when they delivered their ultimatum. I sat. I drank the tea. I looked at the space where they had stood. The room did not hold the ghost of their confrontation anymore. It was just my room again. The phone did not ring. My cell phone, lying on the table beside me, remained dark. The silence was a choice I had enforced, and now I had to live inside it. I thought about what they would do next. They would go home to the house that was no longer theirs. They would open the formal notice from the process server. They would call lawyers, bankruptcy lawyers, not estate lawyers. They would have furious conversations, accusations, panic. They might blame each other. They would certainly blame me. I wondered if, in any of those conversations, a moment of clarity would come, a moment where Marcus would remember the boy who helped his father build a treehouse, or the young man who promised his parents he would make them proud. I did not know. That was no longer my concern. My concern was the integrity of my own life. As the afternoon light softened, I rose and went to my study. I unlocked the drawer and took out the folder Arthur had given me, the draft of the Vance Legacy Fund. I read it carefully at my desk. It outlined a structure for a charitable trust, with me as the sole trustee. It could provide scholarships for women returning to education later in life, or small grants for local community projects. It was a way to redirect the capital, to create something that could not be exploited, only appreciated. I set the paper down. This was a project for tomorrow. For today, there was only the quiet. I made a simple dinner for myself. I ate at the kitchen table, listening to the radio tuned to a classical music station. The music was complex and orderly, a system of rules and beauty. It soothed me. Later, as night fell, I walked through the house, turning on lamps. I checked the locks on the doors and windows, a nightly ritual. I paused at the front door, my hand on the deadbolt. This was my threshold. They had crossed it with malice in their hearts. Now they were barred from it by the consequences of their own actions. The lock was a practical device, but in that moment it felt symbolic. I went to bed early. The sheets were cool. The house settled into its nighttime sounds. I lay awake for a while, listening. The sorrow and the relief coexisted inside me, two currents in the same deep river. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind this calmer, harder substance, resolution. I had not destroyed my family. I had merely forced a reckoning with the truth of what it had become. What it might become again in some distant future was unknown. That was the space I had created. It was a space of silence, but it was not empty. It was full of potential, and it was mine. The streets they walked now were silent for me, but they were loud with their own chaos. My street, my house, my mind were quiet. For the first time in weeks, I felt the quiet as peace, not as prelude. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow was a new day, and it would be mine to design. The morning light felt different. It was not the harsh, accusing light of the living room confrontation, nor the sterile glow of the conference room. It was a clear, gentle light that fell across my kitchen table as I ate my toast and reviewed the finalized trust documents. The Vance Legacy Fund was now a legal entity. The first tranche of capital, funds recovered from the dissolved business trust, had been transferred into its accounts. My signature at the bottom of the document was firm, unhesitating. Arthur had handled the final details with his usual efficiency. The foreclosure on Marcus and Chloe's house was proceeding. A realtor would list it next week. The business loan had been formally written off as a loss, a necessary casualty. The financial disentanglement was complete. My own accounts were consolidated, healthy, and entirely under my control. The silence from my son's family continued. I did not know where they were living. I had instructed Arthur not to inform me unless there was a genuine emergency. It was a clean break, surgically precise. My focus now was on the fund's first initiative. I had decided on a micro-grant program for women over 50 who wanted to start or expand a small business. It was not a scholarship for the young, but an investment in proven resilience, in the kind of quiet wisdom that is so often overlooked. The grants would be small, $5,000 each, but paired with mentorship from local business leaders. I would be one of those mentors. Today was the first meeting with the selection committee. We were to gather at the community center in the old part of town, a solid brick building that housed everything from yoga classes to tax assistance clinics. I dressed in a simple linen trouser suit, comfortable shoes. I collected the folders containing the anonymized applications we would review. The community center was bustling with mid-morning activity. I walked down a corridor smelling of floor polish and coffee to a sunlit meeting room. 3 other women were already there, arranged around a scarred wooden table. Margaret, a retired school principal. Linda, who had run a successful catering business for 30 years. Sophia, a former bank manager. Arthur had helped me identify them. They were women of substance and pragmatism. We greeted each other with firm handshakes and brief smiles. There was no small talk about grandchildren. We were there to work. "Shall we begin?" Margaret said, tapping the stack of applications. "We have 12 to review for this first cycle. We can fund 6. We opened the folders. The stories inside were not tales of dramatic tragedy, but of quiet determination. A woman who had been a bookkeeper for a small factory that closed, wanting to start a remote bookkeeping service for other small businesses. Another who was a master seamstress, seeking funds for an industrial-grade machine to take on contract work for theaters. A third who had developed a line of herbal salves and needed capital for proper licensing and packaging. We read in silence, making notes. The room was quiet except for the rustle of paper and the hum of an old air conditioner. I felt a sense of calm purpose I had not felt in years. This was analysis. This was evaluation based on merit, plan, and character. It was the work I understood. Application number 4, Linda said, looking up. The woman with the mobile pet grooming van. Her financial projections are conservative, but her market research is excellent. She's identified a niche in the newer suburbs. I agree, Sophia said. She's thinking about scalability, even at a small level. That shows foresight. We debated, discussed, compared. The conversation was respectful, sharp, and productive. There was no manipulation, no hidden agenda, no pity. We were assessing capability, not exploiting vulnerability. The contrast to my recent personal experience was not lost on me. It was a balm. After 2 hours, we had our 6. We drafted a brief, warm letter of offer for each and a polite letter of decline for the others, with an invitation to reapply after strengthening certain aspects of their proposals. The work was done. As the others gathered their things, Margaret lingered. Eleanor, this is a remarkable thing you've set in motion. It fills a real gap. These women, they have the skills, but the traditional banks often don't see them. I know, I said. They see age or a lack of flashy credentials. They don't see the asset of experience. She nodded, a look of understanding passing between us. Well, we see it. Thank you. After they left, I stayed for a moment, alone in the sunny room. I looked at the empty chairs, at the list of names we had chosen. These were my terms now. This was the new foundation, not one built on obligation and silent resentment, but on chosen investment and clear-eyed respect. I drove home, the late afternoon sun warming the car. My house welcomed me, not as a fortress, but as a home. I changed into comfortable clothes and went into the garden. The roses needed pruning. I took my shears and set to work, clipping away the dead wood to make way for new growth. The physical action was satisfying, the results immediate and clear. As I worked, I thought of Marcus. I wondered if he had found a job, any job. I wondered if the shock had begun to harden into a lesson. I felt the familiar pull of a mother's worry, but I did not act on it. I had set my boundary. The space between us was his to cross or not. My responsibility now was to tend my own garden in every sense. I finished pruning and stood back, wiping my hands on my apron. The garden looked orderly, promising. Inside, on my desk, was the paperwork for the next phase of the fund. There was correspondence to answer, a meeting with a potential corporate sponsor to prepare for. My phone, sitting on the garden table, remained silent. The world I had reclaimed was quiet, but it was not empty. It was full of purpose of my own choosing. The vengeance was complete. It had been a demolition, a necessary clearing. What I was building in its place was not for them, and not against them. It was simply for itself, and for the women who, like me, understood that capability does not expire, and respect is the only currency that truly matters. I picked up the basket of clippings and carried them to the compost bin. The cycle turned. I went inside, washed my hands, and put the kettle on. Tomorrow was another day. I would meet it on my own terms.